been a minute since we've looked at any car stuff, but today we're going to be back at it again, this time with a Kia Soul 3rd generation, that's 2020 and up, showing you how I installed a Kicker Hideaway sub underneath the passenger seat. That kit comes with all the cabling you need. You still need a few different tools. We'll go through that as we go along. I already have this up and working, but I didn't think to document anything at the time. So I'm going back and showing you guys exactly what I did. Hopefully this helps some of you guys out. Let's take a look. For the tools that we're gonna need, they're all pretty basic, but let's go ahead and cover them. For sockets, you're gonna need a 10 mil and a 14 millimeter. For screwdrivers, all we need is a classic Phillips, a crimping tool, cutting tool, some edge cutters might come in handy, zip ties, and I would definitely recommend getting some wire loom or some sort of loom to cover the wiring that we're going to be putting inside the engine bay. For the wiring, the actual wiring, we're going to need some of these vampire clamps. I forget the technical term, but get yourself a bundle of these. That's it apart from a trim removal tool, and we're going to start right there. Potentially the most fiddly thing we're going to have to do is get the trim out of here. Now get yourself some sort of trim removal tool and start putting it into the side of this thing. Find a place where you might have a little bit of space. You can try pushing on the actual dash a little bit, seeing if that gives you enough space until you can actually fit the tool in here, and then slowly pry towards you with the tool and then pull with your hand. That way you make sure you don't leave any weird marks on the actual trim of the car. Okay, we got it. Once we have the trim off, we're going to need to take out 4 screws. The trickiest one to get to is right over in this area, just because the steering wheel might get in the way of your screwdriver. I just am swapping out to a different one because of that. But the other 2 are at the top over here and here. The one over here has a mirrored brother over here. So just get all those screws out. Once you do that, you should be able to just kind of pull this out. So let me go ahead and get those out and give it a go. Now that we have all of these screws taken out, we should be able to just kind of pull on this and get it free. You see there's already some movement, but this is definitely easier with 2 hands. So I'll go ahead and do that. And for me, this definitely was really stuck there, especially the first time I took this out. And even still, it feels like it's really in there. But with enough force, you should be able to set it free. There we go. Now that we've got that going, we have access to the wires behind there. I don't think I'm exaggerating in saying that if you can do that part, everything else should be relatively simple. That was probably the most annoying thing we're going to do. So if you can get past that, I think the rest of it should be pretty straightforward. Now let's go take a look at some of the wiring. Before we get too in the weeds, this is where I actually have the Kicker mounted. This is right underneath the passenger front door. And normally you're gonna have a vent kind of blocking your way there. And there is the vent that I'm talking about. And you can actually just pull that straight out. For this run, we're actually not gonna worry about installing the remote wire, that blue wire coming from the harness. We're just gonna take the speaker wires and run those separately. So again, I don't want to run the power and the speaker wires together. So the speaker wires I have running under that center console plastic, you should be able to just kind of tuck cables in there. Once you get that going, continue until you get to this point. This panel should be able to just kind of pop open and get some access here. With the stereo unit removed, you should be able to just fish a cable from the top down here and tie those speaker cables with it and pull it up. That's probably the easiest way. That's the quickest way that I could find without, making myself take further panels off of here. There's 2 connectors on the factory radio, at least on this one, the 7-inch one. And the ones that we're splicing into is connector A. That's what it's going to be referred to in the wiring diagram that I'm going to link down below. And the ones that I spliced into, I'm just going to double check, is pin 1 is rear door left positive, and pin 2 is rear door left negative. So you're going to want to make sure that you connect the left side. And then the other 2, let me just double check, are going to be 27 for rear door right negative, and then 28 for rear door right positive. Once you have those connected, you should be totally fine. The connection is pretty easy with those connectors that I'm about to show you. There are lots of ways to splice cables, but this is a pretty easy one. And I really liked it. So the way that this works is because we're not going to actually chop the cables from the factory harness, the easiest way to do it is with something like this, where we can just slide it through, make sure it goes into that channel right here, and get the other cable, put it into this secondary channel, make sure that they're intersecting at this point at minimum. And once you got that, just use some pliers, push this down, and that's going to compress it and short with this little metal piece. After that's all the way down, you should be able to just flip this over and it'll clip nicely in place. Once you have all those connectors in place, that's it. We're not going to be doing anything else with the factory unit. Just make sure to reconnect everything back in there, that everything fits snugly, that when you push it into place, nothing feels odd or like you're cramming something when you're not supposed to. It is going to be tight, don't get me wrong. Just make sure it doesn't feel crunchy or something like that. On the run for the power that's going to be going to the engine bay, instead of going around the passenger side, I'm actually going to be running that through the driver's side just to avoid any potential issues with running the power and the speaker units together. So I have it going into the center console, going kind of underneath my liner, and running that kind of hidden all the way until it gets to here. Once you get it to this point, you should be able to just kind of tuck it in underneath here, and should be able to pry this up enough to do the same and tuck in that cable all the way until you get to here. And the good news is that there's already a grommet that we can install and get it passed through the firewall, as long as I can get it down here. And there is a grommet already in there. What I had to do was use a screwdriver to kind of push through a hole to make room for that second cable. Once I did that, I was just able to feed all of the cable through into the engine bay. Over here on the engine bay side, the cable is going to be peeking out over here in this corner. If you have enough of length pushed through, it'll probably be pretty obvious as to where it is. You might even be able to pull it out with your hands, but I ended up having to use pliers to get that going. Once you get it up here, you're going to want to grab the fuse that came with this kit. I cut it in half down the middle and strip both ends of the cable. One end, you're going to crimp this circular connector. This is where you're going to need that 10mm socket. Undo this. Just simply slide this over that screw it back in there. And the only thing I did to make sure that this seats well is snip this little corner. That way I can easily close it just like before. The other end of this, you're going to want to crimp that little connection that they give you. You get all the parts that you need included in the kit. The only thing that isn't included is this sheathing over here. I would definitely recommend doing that just to avoid any potential issues, as well as zip tying it to a couple of points. That way you make sure it's not rattling around in there. There's already a fuse pre-installed in there, so no need to worry about anything else. That's it.
Since we're limited with the relatively short ground cable coming from the harness to the sub, I ended up choosing this bolt right here, which connects the passenger seat to the chassis. We're going to use our 14mm socket, pop that open, and the only thing I did at this point was strip about an inch or two off of that ground cable, put it back in, and make sure as I was reinstalling the bolt that it was making a pretty solid connection. That's worked well for me so far, but if you have any other solutions, definitely leave it in the comments. One thing you might notice is that I did sheath this cabling and it was all nice and neat, but it's moved quite a bit and it's exposed all of this wiring, which looks pretty bad. That's because I haven't secured it down onto the car just yet. The only thing I've done so far is put a sheet of rubber underneath it, that way it doesn't slide around nearly as much, just because I haven't wanted to commit to drilling holes on the floor just yet. So if I find some other solution, I'll let you guys know. Otherwise, you can let me know what you guys do.
Once you have all those cables through, you're done. That's pretty much it. You can clean up some of the install that you did. Just install that harness into the actual sub unit. The LED on it is probably going to turn blue. We just got to double check a couple of switches. Make sure that the auto turn on is set to DC and not 12 volts. And make sure the input level is set to high. That's how this is going to detect when the factory head unit gets power, and it's going to turn itself on and turn itself off alongside it. What I found, at least in my case, is that after about 5 minutes or so, both of them turn off just fine. So I don't think I'm going to have any issues with the parasitic drain or anything like that. If I do have any issues, I will definitely update you guys. Watch for a pinned comment down below. If you have any questions, any concerns, if I did anything kind of sketch, because again, I'm not a pro at this, I just like doing my DIY projects, leave them down below. If this was useful to you, definitely subscribe to the channel, leave a like. Cars aren't really the main focus of this, but I do love anything electronic, including in here. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll leave links to all the stuff that I use down below. that's it for me, y'all. See ya.